Welcome back, everyone. This is Rashad Woods with the T.R.O.N podcast. Today, I have a very special guest who has carved out time for me on this program, and I cannot emphasize how happy I am that he did so. He's the executive director of GRAAMA, the Grand Rapids African American Museum and Archives, a man who is a very established historian, appraiser, Mr. George Bayard III. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rashad.
I don't want to obviously overtalk your accomplishments. You can obviously speak for them yourself. You're a filmmaker. You're a documentary filmmaker. You started in arts, and you started the Grand Rapids African American Museum in 2015. But you did a lot of things that predated that as well, too.
Well, yeah, we before that we were art gallery owners. We were part of the arts community in Grand Rapids and Detroit. I mean, we got all our friends down at the National Conference of Artists down there, and some of the galleries that we frequented there. Many of the artists we had here, we coddled them in Detroit. We collected their works and tried to give them a voice here on the western side of the state. Beside that, I mean, what that entailed, we called Bayard Gallery of Fine African American Art, basically an art gallery. But we did everything else. We did picture framing, we did appraisals, we slowly added books and collectibles, then African artifacts, and we became a cultural hub for the community. Branching out from that, everything that encompassed our culture, we did. I mean, Juneteenth, Kwanzaa, we developed a festival which we called Soul of the City. So we were very engaged with the community. We've always been. I'm personally not from Michigan. I was born in Delaware. Went to school in Philadelphia. My wife is from Ohio, so we kind of got here on a circuitous route to get here to Michigan.
Congrats to your Eagles, by the way.
Huh?
Congrats to your Eagles.
Yeah, I just took off my Eagles gear. I didn't want. I had my Eagles hat on. My brother's sending me stuff in the mail, so I'm like, okay, yeah, we can still celebrate. But yeah, we were. It was such a difference moving from the East Coast to Michigan because everything out east is 100 years older. And so, where you would come here and see things from the 1800s, in museums and things on the East Coast, things are from the earlier centuries, and so there's a getting used to-ness of it coming here to the Midwest. And we found that because I think my wife had an opportunity to work either in Detroit, Flint, or Grand Rapids, and she took Grand Rapids, and then I followed shortly after that. So that's how we got here. And as I said, it's always been part of our culture. If I go back before that, in my town of Wilmington, Delaware, we lived in what I think is the very first suburban Black community in the country. It was right after World War II, a community where in other parts of the country, they were taking Black GIs benefits and not turning them into property or anything. They couldn't get their benefits. Here, they worked a deal with the DuPonts, who basically run Delaware, and the federal government to create a housing community that was based on the suburban trend that was happening in the late 50s. And we had literally an all-Black neighborhood. I mean, it was created. There are older Black neighborhoods, around the country, but this was a suburban post-World War II neighborhood. All of our streets were named after African Americans. Most of them were living at the time. So, we had, I lived on the corner of Ralph Bunch Boulevard, Harry McLeod Bethune Drive, and they were both living at the time.
What an honor.
We have a street named after Jackie Robinson, Marian Anderson, and then some of the colleges, Morehouse, Talladega drives. And so it gave us a really strong roots in African American culture because we were there. I mean, we all went to one school.
Right.
From K to 8th grade, I guess. And everybody lived in the neighborhood. We had entrepreneurs, business people. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of ingrained. And so when we got to school and segregation started, so in a lot of cases, so it was something that we just for me personally, I just continued on with my life and ended up being a collector, an art dealer, an artist.
And your story, when I was looking at where you came from and how you've been involved in the arts and you used to collect comic books
Yep.
and you've always been a collector of sorts. And so when I went to the museum, which I had the privilege of going 2 years ago, I saw, the Blackface exhibits. Now, there's lots of topics, obviously, that, I could probably ask you questions forever, but that was one of the ones that piqued my interest. And I wanted to just go through the history of it from the expert, that you are. And I have a little understanding of it, but how did Blackface actually start?
Well, Blackface, I mean, I guess it would start with Thomas Wright. He was considered the godfather of minstrelsy, and he made a song called Jump Jim Crow.
Right.
And he was a white guy that painted his face black and started imitating what he thought African Americans did. His song, for whatever it was, hit charts or anything, I don't know, went to number one, and everybody in the country kind of embraced it. And so by embracing the song, they embraced him. Like anything else, once something happens and people start making money off of it, then you get the copycatters. Right. So shortly after that, a number of other groups decided that they were going to do the same thing, and a lot of individuals were going to do the same thing. So you're talking probably the 1830s. So this was probably the beginning of vaudeville. And so when we look at entertainment in those days, you're looking at mainly theater type groups, vaudeville acts. Certainly it was the rise of P.T. Barnum and the circuses and carnivals. Those were people's everyday afternoon. Of course, baseball was a big part of that too. We got a whole session on baseball we can do later on.
Really?
Yeah, with the Negro Leagues. Negro Leagues didn't start until a little bit later, but there were a lot of barnstorming teams at the time. But the main way that people had entertainment was to go to a theater and see these acts. And
okay.
The popularity just exploded. Between 1930 and 1940, probably was the start of the meteoric rise of minstrel shows. The whole theme of the minstrel show was, let me say right off, was demeaning to black people.
And wasn't Al Jolson too the big movie star at the time? Yeah,
Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor. There were a number of them who took that route for entertainment.
Right.
But when you go back and look at the original minstrel shows, they were usually they started out kind of as groups of that would paint their face black with burnt cork to imitate black people. There was a very set, regimented program, a three-act program that these minstrel shows would have. They were all based on making fun of black people, degrading black people, and uplifting plantation life. So these were all parts of the components. About the same time, there were black groups doing minstrel shows, and they didn't call them minstrel shows. They were simply called jubilee shows. Okay. They were generally spiritual in nature.
Right.
The Tennessee State Jubilee choirs and things like that would tour. They didn't initially blacken their faces. They were already black, so they didn't have to blacken their faces. Metric caught on so much that they couldn't even get booked into places without literally blackening their already blackened faces. And so you started to get a kind of a parallel where you had white groups with black faces and black groups with black faces competing for the entertainment dollar, so to speak. And so that was how it really got started. Within that time, what you started to get were independent people who kind of broke off doing their own thing. They didn't adhere to the strict minstrel show program, but started to do other kinds of things. And that's how your Al Jolsons and people like that got one of the black entertainers that people may have heard of is Bert Williams. Well, yes, Bert Williams is a great example of somebody who's taken it to the next level. He and his friend George Walker, was Walker and Williams. They were like a duo act, and they started out as regular entertainers doing tap dancing or singing, and they were scooped up by this whole minstrel thing, so that they started blackening their face. But not only were they doing it, they were the best. I mean, they sold out shows when other people didn't sell out shows. And there's always a thing. He's got an interesting story to his life, because he had this rage, and not rage. I guess it was just a fight inside of him about blackening his face and acting foolish, like stereotypes say, or taking the stuff off of his face and just singing like a normal person. And he could do both. So people would always wonder, well, why are you even doing it? Why did you do it? And he did it because it was kind of what people did. I mean, I think fast forward a little bit to current times, and here in West Michigan, the city of Lowell had what was called the Lowell Showboat, and they had a minstrel show on that. Now, I'll get back to that later, but we interviewed men who were part of that minstrel show, and their whole thing was we were just acting. We were just play acting. And it was like, well, didn't you know you were being derogatory? Didn't you know it hurt the feelings of black folks there? They really could care less. They thought they were in a show acting. And that was the excuse that we got for a lot of the men that we interviewed that were doing minstrel shows. But when we go back to Bert Williams also broke into other things. He and his friend recorded. They were some of the very first people who recorded records. They were some of the very first to write their own music, and they were some of the very first to appear in film. Okay. And Bert Williams, toward the end of his life, I think I quoted a number of different ways. He was literally the first black millionaire. I mean, wow. when you break down what he was getting right per album or per, because I mean, there were just outrageous numbers. I mean, you said when records first started coming out, that 10,000, you had a really good day. He was selling like 200,000 records. Right. So, he was unusual character. One of the stories was that he did a show. Everybody at the show went to a bar that was next to the theater. The bartender knew who he was and was going to make him pay like if drinks were $1, he was going to make him pay $50 for a drink. Oh my goodness! He whipped out a wad of cash like this and said, buy everybody a drink. I mean, he was just that kind of guy, but he's an interesting character. But like I said, it was really not until film that the minstrel shows kind of died out. They never died out altogether. As I was saying, with the people down in Lowell, they had the Lowell Showboat here, still doing minstrel shows in the 1970s. And it didn't take. It took. I think it was Pearl Bailey who they had hired to be, the big headline act. They would always have a big headline act, and they'd go through this whole minstrel show thing. And I think Miss Bailey said, if you do minstrel shows, I'm going to cancel my contract and I'm not going to play. And so Pearl Bailey kind of let them have it, and they decided, well, we got her on contract. We already paid her half. Let's not antagonize her anymore. So we're not going to do minstrel shows. So I want to say from like 70 to 73, they didn't do minstrel shows, but then they brought them back after that. And so it's like, what's wrong with you guys? I mean,
get up maybe.
Well, the thing too is that African Americans accepted it too. There was very little pushback. And as I said, here in the western side of the state, the numbers of the populations weren't like Detroit or Flint or Saginaw or someplace else. We really didn't have that many numbers of people. Less than, between 1% and 4% were African American, even up until now. I mean, it's a little more now, but there was always not a lot of numbers of people who would push back and say, oh, I'm offended by that, or I don't think that's a good idea to do that. As a matter of fact, I think when we did our show in 2019, it was as a response from one of the local high schools here had some students who blackened their faces, and I think went to a basketball game or something like that, and taunted some of the players, and the community was outraged, shocked.
Right.
That this happened in 2019. And I think just shortly after that, I think the lady on Fox News had just gotten fired for doing blackface, and somebody else had just gotten fired nationally for doing blackface. So it's never really went away. I mean, there's still probably cases. I used to have sororities and fraternities are the biggest culprits on college campuses. They don't think anybody's filming. But now that you got cell phone cameras, I used to have an app that would just let me know when another blackface news comes up, and it still rings every now and then.
Wow.
But you have this whole progression, I think, and I think the things that you take away from it is that being derogatory to African Americans was commonplace at the time, and that nobody was exempt from it. I mean, when we did our show, we found that there were local churches, local businesses, local corporations, local civic organizations that all did blackface. Even one of our local radio stations had an episode of kind of like an Amos and Andy kind of a thing where they had, it was called Abe and Sambo, and Abe was a Jewish looking guy, and Sambo was a black guy. And so we actually found a photograph of that and say, wait a minute, this is a radio show. Why do you only even need a photograph of them in their get-ups? So it's an unfortunate side of history. There's still volumes being written on it because there were so many groups that did it. And when you start breaking them all down, I mean, we have a little story here about a guy from Grand Rapids who he was one of the very top minstrel entertainers, and went around the country. He was born here, learned minstreling from his mother, who was a minstrel, a white woman minstrel. And there were women groups. They dress up like Aunt Jemimas and do their things. This guy became a celebrity around the country. I don't know, somebody just went up to him one day and said, man, this is really wrong what you're doing. You're degrading African Americans, and we don't like it. And then he took the makeup off and stopped and never did it again. And so there's these stories within stories when you start talking about this blackface, and I hope that can give you kind of a little bit about what it's like and maybe some of the things that happened in your travels. If you get up to the Jim Crow Museum on the campus of Ferris State University,
that's my next one I need to get to.
Dr. Pilgrim has a probably more extensive collection than we do. He's been collecting for a longer time, and they have actual items too to show you that will convey the story a little bit better. The makeup, the whole industry. The joke books, there are whole joke books that are just negative minstrel jokes about black people and Indians and Jewish people. So it was like a whole cottage industry that cropped up from this. And as I said, it was literally the number one form of entertainment in the country for at least between the 40s and for the 30s and the 40s. And then into the 50s a little bit too. So
I thought it was very interesting too, because even when I look back at some of the cartoons I used to watch as a kid, like Tom and Jerry, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this show is like, you didn't even notice that as a kid. And then when you started seeing things as when you got a little bit older, you're like, holy smokes, the mother of Tom and Jerry was a caricature, and you just had no idea. Like, it was so prevalent, and it was slipped into a children's cartoon. Right.
Yeah. I mean, Mickey Mouse, Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny. I mean, if you go back far enough, you'll find it in almost all of them. Absolutely. And some of the earlier ones from the 20s and 30s, they're almost exclusively images of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben kind of images, as well as there's a whole vernacular, the harlot, the
the kids would fall in mud, and then their face would come up exaggerated, and you're like, and like I said, as a kid, you just didn't know, and then you see it when you're older, and you're like, this.
Now it infuriates me when I see it, but
right.
almost, and I think that's what a lot of people is. That at the time, oh, it was just a joke. Oh, it was just a cartoon. Didn't It's because they did not respect our feelings and how it affected us and our children. And so it was okay to keep doing it because there wasn't a pushback. When the 60s and 70s came around and people started pushing back on those kind of things, then, folks took a different look at it. Because, like I said, it had already incorporated into films. A lot of your early films, Shirley Temple, Fred Astaire, Bob Hope, all of those people did blackface. Um, so it was a part of our twisted culture that these things were allowed to go on and be prevalent. And of course, if it makes money, it's going to be harder to convince people not to do it. They'll still do it. They'll find an underground way to do it. And that's why I said specifically sororities and fraternities still do it in their underground layers and where they don't think it can get out. And so while we think it might be gone, I can guarantee you it still happens in different places around the country. And then along with that, it was also popular in Europe and England. And so you had so you had the same thing happening, as a worldwide put down of Black people. And so I'm not sure when the British stopped doing it, but no, actually, the British didn't stop doing it. Matter of fact, there's a show out now that plays in reruns on British TV that has to do with minstrel shows, and they're still playing it.
Well, you still have Zwarte Piet, right? Black people,
Yeah. And then people still even some of the things I've read too haven't even equated, Good Times, the Jeffersons, Sanford and Son to that same kind of a genre. It's a hard argument because some things that you might find just truly funny, are sometimes racist and derogatory.
Well, I think that's why Robert Downey Jr. pulled off such an epic when it came to Tropic Thunder of being able to straddle that line because it was absurd. But I love that movie. I absolutely love that movie. But that's a thin line that he played with that character because you're like, ooh, is this gonna work? And it did.
Yeah,
it really did.
Yeah,
but it did it over the top and the absurdity of it all.
Right. And, I guess you can do anything if you're willing to take the pushback, if you're willing to take a boycott, or you're willing to get your name off the Oscars or whatever. If you want to go ahead and try it, go ahead and try it. Like I said, there were a lot of firings within the last 10 years of, newscasters and sportscasters and actors who went down that road and didn't have the support of people around them or didn't ask anybody, is this a good idea?
Right. Well, just really briefly, I know your time is valuable. Obviously, I would love to follow up and have an additional conversation when it comes to what we're talking about. I certainly didn't mean to cut you off. What else can people know about the Grand Rapids African American Museum and Archives?
Well, like I said, we're 10 years old. We're here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I will get you a QR code that you can have people scan that'll get us into our social networks. And we're trying to move. We're in a place that's about 2,000 square feet right now, and we've got our eye on a building that's maybe 10 times the size. So that's our big push and big projects for the upcoming year. Believe me, I've got a little picture of Charles Wright Museum when they were in a little trailer on my desk, and it reminds me every day where you start and where you end up and how long it takes sometime. I know it took them about 60 years to get from that little trailer to where they are now. It took the National Museum 100 years to get to where they are. So we're expecting great things from the community. We have had support, and now we're kind of going to some big dollars, funders, national monies. But, things that just as soon as you get ready to make that step, you get all your federal funds being frozen or federal grants, anything that has to do with DEI being frozen. So it's a challenging time for museums, and just tell people out there, support any of your local museums, especially if they are purveying African American history and culture. It's not going to be here forever, folks. I mean, and there are doors closing every day that we can see in our connections with other museums around the country because federal dollars have dried up. So they're going to be asking the public to come back and support. And please do support your local African American museum.
I think the work that you do is wonderful. You've been at the forefront of some incredible work that you've done. I was honored to be able to step foot into that museum and get it. It's one thing to read in a book. It's one thing to go on the internet. It's another thing to see things in person and be able to actually walk around them. And it was a really in somewhat a gut wrenching experience to kind of actually see the images and up close and watch the things that books and what the work that you do. I'm really appreciative of it. And again, your time, since I know it's so valuable, I'm so honored to have had it.
Well, like I said, Rashad, we're glad to come through. And you're right. Collecting is the great part of it. I mean, because it takes you right to the time, right to the image, right to the person. And that's the thing that I love doing most in this whole museum business. It's collecting the objects and then prying a little bit to find the stories behind them. I've surprised myself with some of the things that we've run across. A lady just donated a Clementine Hunter. She's an artist from the South, a folk artist, famous because she's probably the most copied artist of all time. Her work's very primitive looking, so anybody thinks they can do it and get away with it. And there were some pros out there that sold them to museums, sold them to galleries, and someone just donated an authentic one to us. So we're always looking to collect and building our collection to make it tell those stories of people that are gone past us and need their story to be told.
Right. And, and I thought, and just briefly, I think it was good to see for me what I may have missed when I was younger and what I didn't see when I was actually younger. And, I think that when you start diving into that history of how this became, you become a better person in understanding of how that actually led up to today. What was a form of entertainment, you're like, you're like, this, I'm blown away. This was entertainment for people,
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, too, it's always talk to young people, again, too, about collecting because you just never know what's going to be valuable 50 years down the road. I mean, like you said, when you're young, you'd have baseball cards or comic books, you throw them away. Now they're worth thousands of dollars. And I tell kids all the time, I say, you guys got one of these things in your pocket. What is this going to look like 50 years from now? You're going to be saying, oh, yeah, remember we used to use those Apple things? Remember, you'll have some little thing on your glasses or virtual screen in front of you, and you'll be saying these will be in museums. And so you never really know. And I definitely wish I could crank the time back for 30, 40 years. I'd be rich now with all the things that I know that are quite collectible. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And always the purpose of the T.R.O.N podcast, as the outro, is to talk to, experts in fields of work and items that are of curiosity. And whether or not, whatever you're an expert in, I think it's important that you people listen to what you're an expert in the field that you are. And that's the purpose of the show. And to get somebody like you with the work that you do, like I said, I was chomping at the bit, hitting that send button to see what would happen if you would reply. And I'm honored that I was able to get a reply and be able to get some time. And I would love to have a follow-up about these topics we discussed.
Oh, absolutely. We'll do this again. It's just getting the schedule right and getting in there. And I think we can definitely do this again. I'd like to talk to you about a lot more things. There's still a connection here with Detroit and Grand Rapids. Like I said, we've got a whole thing about Negro League Baseball, and one of our owners here that owned the Detroit Stars for a while, we just honored her in a gala a few months ago, and she's got a whole story. I just did a presentation on, it was called Comstocks Row. It was the very first place that African Americans lived when they came here to Grand Rapids, and it's a whole involved story with that. So there's a lot of things that we'll talk about. I mean, we'll do 2 or 3 more shots, I think, in the coming year, and we just again, reach out to our Detroit audience and say thank you, Rashad, for letting us be on your program today.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored. Like I said, stay warm and blessings to you and all the great work that you do. Really appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you.